In January 2025, a KTM rider tore across the finish line of the Dakar Rally, one of the most brutal races on earth, and handed the Orange brand its 20th title in what is widely called one of the toughest motorsport events ever created. 2 weeks of desert, dunes, broken bones, and burned-out engines. And once again, KTM came out on top. They were winning. Again. Like they always did. But while that bike was crossing the line in the Saudi sand, back home in the tiny Austrian town of Mattighofen, the company that built it, was buried under nearly 3 billion euros of debt. Creditor groups would call it the largest bankruptcy ever filed in Upper Austria. The factory floor was dark. Thousands of jobs were hanging by a thread. So how does a company win just about everything on the track and still come within an inch of losing all of it? Grab a seat, because this one is wild. To understand how big this fall was, you have to understand how high KTM had climbed. And the story starts in a workshop in 1934. Back then, KTM was not a motorcycle empire. It was a metalworking and car repair shop in Mattighofen, opened by an engineer named Hans Trunkenpolz. For years, they fixed cars and sold motorbikes built by other people. Their first real motorcycle prototype did not show up until 1951. A businessman named Ernst Kronreif bought in. The company became Kronreif and Trunkenpolz Mattighofen, and those 3 letters, KTM, were born. Here is the part most people skip, and trust me, it matters later. KTM had already gone bankrupt once. In the early 1990s, the moped market collapsed. A few side bets on bicycles and radiators went sideways. And in December 1991, the company filed what was, at the time, the largest corporate bankruptcy in its area. Sound familiar? Hold that thought. Out of that wreckage walked a man named Stefan Pierer. Pierer was a restructuring specialist, the kind of investor who buys broken companies cheap and squeezes them. He once described his younger self as a corporate locust, which, honestly, is a brutally accurate word for it. He bought the motorcycle division out of insolvency, and on a cold January day in 1992, the new KTM restarted with just 160 employees and a plan to build a few thousand bikes a year. That is where the magic started. Pierer teamed up with a designer named Gerald Kiska, who gave KTM the thing every great brand needs: an attitude, the aggressive orange paint, the sharp, angry styling, and the phrase that would define everything KTM ever did: ready to race. This was not just a slogan slapped on a poster, it was the entire business plan. KTM decided that racing would be its marketing department. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday, and then win on basically every other day of the week too. The energy drink giant Red Bull came on board as a sponsor, those blue and silver cans showing up next to the orange bikes at every start line, and KTM went hunting for trophies. And my goodness, did they find them. Let us talk about the Dakar, because this is where KTM became a legend. The Dakar Rally is roughly 2 weeks of racing across some of the most hostile terrain on the planet. Riders navigate dunes, dry riverbeds, and endless open desert, often crashing, sometimes worse. It is the Everest of motorcycle racing, and starting in 2001, KTM won it. Then they won it again, and again. They won the Dakar for 18 years in a row, all the way to 2019, 18 straight. No manufacturer in modern Dakar history has matched that streak in the motorcycle class. Off-road, it was the same story. In motocross and supercross, the sport where riders launch 30 feet into the air over dirt jumps, KTM and its sister brands piled up world championships and American titles like it was a hobby. If the ground was dirt and the engine was loud, an orange bike was probably about to beat you. Then, in 2017, KTM did something genuinely audacious. They jumped into MotoGP, the Formula One of motorcycle racing, the fastest, most expensive, most cutthroat class in the world, ruled for decades by Japanese and Italian giants like Honda, Yamaha, and Ducati. A relatively small Austrian company showing up to fight them was a little like a regional brewery deciding to take on Coca-Cola. Cute idea. good luck. And then in August 2020, at the Brno circuit in the Czech Republic, a young South African rider named Brad Binder did the unthinkable. He won. In the rain, charging through the field, Binder gave KTM its first Premier Class MotoGP victory, and he did it in only his third race in the class. The orange brand had arrived at the top table. The little Austrian underdog was now beating the biggest names in the sport. So racing was handled. But none of that pays the bills on its own. The trophies were the marketing. The real engine was the showroom. And here is where the numbers get almost cartoonish. By 2022, KTM and its sister brands sold more than 375,000 motorcycles in a single year. That was the 12th record year in a row. Think about that, 12 straight years of beating their own best number. The following year, 2023, they pushed past 381,000 bikes and pulled in around 2.66 billion euros in revenue. At peak production, the Mattighofen factory was rolling out close to 1,000 motorcycles every single day. KTM had officially become the largest motorcycle manufacturer in all of Europe. The kid who restarted with 160 employees now ran a continent-beating empire. And like a lot of empires, KTM got hungry, really hungry. The company went on a shopping spree. They bought the legendary Swedish brand Husqvarna. They scooped up the Spanish off-road brand Gas for almost nothing. They grabbed a controlling stake in the gorgeous, exotic Italian marque MV Agusta. They moved into electric bicycles, buying bike companies and pouring money into pedal power. The plan was simple and very confident. More brands, more bikes, more factories, more everything. Conquer the entire two-wheeled world. And to fund all that conquering, KTM borrowed a lot. The whole model was built on a belief that demand would keep climbing forever, that every record year would be followed by another one. As long as people kept buying bikes faster than KTM could build them, the debt was no problem. You can probably feel the floor about to give way, because the thing about building 1,000 bikes a day is that it only works if somebody is buying 1,000 bikes a day. And around 2023, people stopped. Let us rewind slightly to understand why. During the pandemic, power sports went absolutely nuclear. Stuck at home, flush with cash, and desperate to do something outdoors, people bought dirt bikes and adventure bikes like crazy. Demand was through the roof. And KTM, reading that boom as the new normal, did what KTM always did. They went bigger. They cranked production up, expanded everything, and bet the house that the party would never stop. The party stopped. Interest rates shot up, inflation hit. Suddenly, a brand new motorcycle was a luxury a lot of people quietly decided they could skip this year. Demand cooled fast. But KTM's factories were still running flat out, still pumping out bikes at full speed, because turning a machine that big around takes time the company did not have. So the bikes started to pile up, and pile up, and pile up. This is the moment the whole thing turned. By the time the crisis was laid bare in court, KTM and its dealers were sitting on a staggering mountain of unsold motorcycles. Depending on which point in time you measure, the figures reported ran from well over 100,000 bikes to, at the worst estimates, more than 250,000 units gathering dust in warehouses and showrooms. Either way, it was close to an entire year's worth of global sales just sitting there, doing nothing, costing money to store, and slowly losing value. Some of those bikes did not even meet the newest European emissions rules, which meant in some markets, KTM literally could not sell them at all. And remember those electric bicycles, the trendy side bet? That little adventure reportedly racked up something like 400 million euros in losses. 400 million. On bicycles. The off-road kings had wandered into a market they did not understand at the worst possible time, and got torched. Now watch how fast the dominoes fall once the money turns. In the first half of 2024, KTM's parent company swung from a healthy profit the year before to a serious loss. By the middle of that year, net debt had ballooned to around 1.4 billion euros. By the time the full year was tallied up, the company was staring at a net loss of nearly 1.2 billion euros, and something even scarier for a business. negative equity. In plain English, on paper, the company now owed more than it was worth. The Orange Empire was bleeding out. And on November 29, 2024, KTM did the thing nobody thought possible. It filed for insolvency. This was not a quiet little restructuring. The combined liabilities across KTM and its key subsidiaries came in at nearly 3 billion euros. Austria's creditor associations did not mince words. One expert flatly called it the largest bankruptcy ever filed in Upper Austria. The largest ever. KTM alone owed money to around 1,600 creditors, including roughly 180 different banks and a long list of suppliers who suddenly had no idea if they would ever get paid. 2 weeks later, on December 13, 2024, the unthinkable happened in MotoGP. The factory stopped. The production lines that had been spitting out 1,000 bikes a day went silent. And here is what hits hardest if you actually know this place. MotoGP is basically a KTM town. The company is the heartbeat of the local economy. Thousands of families in that corner of Austria depend on those orange bikes for their livelihood. Over the course of the crisis, the workforce would be cut from around 6,000 people down toward 3,800. Hundreds and hundreds of jobs gone. This was not just a balance sheet problem. It was a community staring down a nightmare. And the man who built it all, Stefan Pierer, the locust who had spent 33 years turning a bankrupt workshop into a continental giant, stepped down. First, he handed off the CEO role in January 2025, then he left the board entirely a couple of months later. His own words said everything. He called KTM his life's work. He said it had always been more than a company to him. It was a passion, a mission, and a family. The restructuring specialist, the guy who made his name fixing broken companies, had just watched his own masterpiece break. There is a dark poetry to that you cannot make up. So that is the picture in early 2025. Bankrupt, factory dark, founder gone, thousands of jobs on the line, a 90-year-old icon flat on its back. And here's the truly insane part. The part I still can barely believe. While all of this was happening, KTM was winning more than ever on the track. Remember that 2025 Dakar win from the very start of this video, the 20th title in the Saudi desert? KTM was already in insolvency when that bike crossed the line. The rider led from start to finish, only the second person in history to ever do that. And it did not stop there. In 2025, even as the company was fighting for its life in a courtroom, KTM's racing operation racked up a record-breaking 29 championship titles across every discipline you can imagine. 29. How is that even possible? How do you win 29 titles while you are technically bankrupt? Well, it turns out the racing side was run through separate companies that were not named in the bankruptcy filing, and key racing contracts had even been moved to a Swiss entity to keep them safe. So when the main business collapsed, racing kept going, backed by sponsors like Red Bull. It was not totally immune. The parents' money troubles still cast a long shadow, and creditors at one point pushed to axe the MotoGP project entirely. But it was protected enough to keep winning, which means KTM spent 2025 in the most surreal split screen in motorsport history. Boardroom on fire, trophy cabinet overflowing. They were arguably the most successful off-road racing brand in the world, and one missed payment away from disappearing. Let me say that again, because it is genuinely nuts. Among the very best on earth, and almost dead at the same time. But trophies do not pay creditors, and the clock was ticking. If you are enjoying this orange roller coaster, do me a quick favor and hit subscribe. We dig into the wildest stories in the moto world every week, and this rescue is about to get even more dramatic. Now, back to the fight for KTM's survival. In February 2025, KTM's fate landed in front of its creditors at a courthouse in Austria. The deal on the table was painful. Creditors would get a 30% payout on what they were owed, 30 cents on the euro. Not great if you are owed millions. But for a lot of them, 30% of something beat 100% of a dead company. Not everyone was happy. A US hedge fund that had been buying up KTM's debt pushed hard for a bigger slice, But in the end, the overwhelming majority of creditors voted yes. There was just one enormous catch. To make the deal real, KTM had to come up with a cash payment of 548 million euros and deposit it by a hard deadline in late May 2025, more than €500 million, from a company that was, bankrupt and not currently building anything. No money, no deal, the whole thing collapses for good. So where do you find €500 million in a few months when your factory is dark? KTM tried to restart production in March, got a small cash injection going, and began building bikes again. And then, in one of the most humiliating moments of the entire saga, it stopped. Again. Because here is what happens when you nearly go bankrupt. People stop trusting you. KTM's own suppliers, the companies that make the parts that go into the bikes, were still owed money from before the collapse. And they were not about to ship a fresh truckload of components to a company that might not survive to pay for them. So they held back parts. Without parts, you cannot build bikes. And so, after assembling only around 4,200 motorcycles, the lines in Mattighofen ground to a halt a second time in late April 2025. Around 3,000 workers were sent home on reduced hours. The comeback had stalled before it even got going, strangled by a collapse in trust. Brutal. KTM needed a savior, and it needed one with very deep pockets and a very steady nerve. Enter Bajaj. Now, if you are not deep into the global motorcycle world, that name might not mean much to you, but Bajaj Auto is a giant. It is one of the largest motorcycle manufacturers on the planet, based in India, and it pumps out millions of bikes a year. Here is the kicker. Bajaj and KTM were not strangers, not even close. Bajaj had first invested in KTM back in 2007. For nearly 2 decades, the Indian company had been a partner, even building smaller KTM models in India. So when the Austrian icon was drowning, the lifeline came from a friend who had been standing there the whole time. Bajaj put together a financing package that, according to reporting from Bloomberg, ran as high as 800 million euros. They lined up a massive loan, backed by huge international banks. And in May 2025, just before the deadline, they confirmed the money. KTM met its payment. 548 million euros was deposited. The plan was saved. Production eventually roared back to life that summer, prioritizing the off-road bikes the brand was famous for. The KTM boss at the time put it simply. They had worked out a way to raise the money they needed for a new start. They had pulled it off. They had survived. But survival came at a price, a big one. Because once Bajaj rescued you with that kind of money, Bajaj was not going to stay a junior partner. Over the course of 2025, Bajaj tightened its grip. The European regulators approved the deal, and on November 18, 2025, it became official. Bajaj took full control of KTM. And here's the change that hit every longtime fan right in the chest. The Pierer name gave way to a new era. The parent company, formerly known as Pierer Mobility, was rebranded as Bajaj Mobility, a change that formally completed in early 2026, with the headquarters in Mattighofen. After 33 years, the era of Stefan Pierer was over. The man who rescued KTM back in 1992 and spent more than 3 decades rebuilding it had stepped aside, and a new chapter under Indian ownership had begun. The boss of the new operation promised that KTM would stay an Austrian company with its own management, still leading on design, engineering, and racing. But make no mistake, the owner was now in India. As part of cleaning house, KTM also let go of some of its toys. That beautiful Italian brand MV Agusta was sold back to its previous owners, set free to be independent again. The electric bicycle dream was gone. The sprawling empire was trimmed back down to the brands that actually mattered: KTM, Husqvarna, Gas, and the suspension specialist WP, so the patient survived the surgery. The big question now, the one every fan is asking, is KTM actually getting better, or is it just on life support? Let us start with the racing, because that is the soul of this brand. And the news there is mostly good. KTM confirmed it is staying in MotoGP. The 2026 lineup is genuinely strong, led by the young Spanish superstar Pedro Acosta and the loyal Brad Binder, with two more experienced riders running in the satellite team. KTM even fired up an engine for the sport's next generation of rules before anyone else, a clear signal they plan to stick around and fight. And then there was the 2026 Dakar. Oh, this one is special. KTM won it, again, but not in the dominant runaway way they used to. This time the rider Luciano Benavides beat his Honda rival by a margin of 2 seconds. 2 seconds. After 2 solid weeks and thousands of miles of racing across the desert. It was the closest finish in the history of the Dakar Rally, and it gave KTM its 21st title in the event. If you wanted a perfect metaphor for the new KTM, there it is. Still winning, but by the thinnest of margins, fighting for every inch. Now the business side, where the recovery story gets genuinely encouraging, with one big asterisk I will be straight with you about. The numbers are healing. Net debt was slashed roughly in half from that scary 1.4 billion euros down toward around 800 million euros. That mountain of unsold bikes was cut down by over 100,000 units. Sales started climbing again. The second half of 2025 saw retail sales jump around 60% compared to the first half. And in the first quarter of 2026, bike sales more than doubled, up around 125%, with revenue climbing 70%. After all that darkness, the Orange brand was selling bikes again and moving in the right direction. The company even returned to a reported profit for 2025. And here is the asterisk, because I promised I would keep it real with you. A huge chunk of that profit came from a one-time accounting gain, basically the benefit of all that debt being written off in the restructuring. Strip that out, and the underlying business was still climbing out of a hole, not partying on a yacht. This was a company stabilizing, not a company that had magically fixed everything overnight. And there are real storm clouds still on the horizon, a few you should keep your eye on. First, trust. KTM had already taken a reputation hit before the bankruptcy over a camshaft wear issue on some of its parallel twin engines, where owners reported premature wear and worried about engine damage. KTM maintained the parts were not inherently defective and repaired affected bikes, but a frustrated owners group swelled into the thousands online, and resale values took a knock. When a company nearly dies, every existing doubt gets louder. One reader survey during the crisis found that a large majority of riders were not comfortable putting a deposit on a new KTM. Winning that trust back is its own long race. Second, the new owner wants to cut costs hard. Reports suggested Bajaj's chief wanted to slash overheads by around half, and at one point even floated selling off the prized MotoGP team. The good news for race fans is that by early 2026, that team sale appeared to be off the table, with the company betting the value of a MotoGP outfit will climb under the sport's new ownership. The motorsport boss insisted KTM is in MotoGP to stay. But the tension between a cost-cutting owner and an expensive racing habit is very real, and it is not going away. Third, the stars. That young phenom Pedro Acosta, the brightest talent KTM has, is widely rumored to be eyeing a move to rival Ducati down the line. Nothing was set in stone, and KTM said it was fighting to keep him, but losing your future superstar would sting. And looming over all of it is the biggest question of all. Will KTM keep building bikes in Austria, in that little town that depends on it, or will the new owner slowly shift more production to India, where it is cheaper? Hundreds more jobs were still on the chopping block heading into 2026. So, After all of that, we are back to the question we started with. Can KTM come back? Here is the case for hope, and it is a real one. This is a brand that has literally died before. Remember 1991? They went bankrupt, got bought out of the ashes, and came back to become the biggest motorcycle manufacturer in Europe. They have done the impossible once already. The racing DNA survived the collapse completely intact. 29 titles and a Dakar win pulled out of the fire. The bikes still earn serious respect from riders. The orange still means something. And now they are backed by one of the largest, most financially solid motorcycle companies on the planet, instead of a tower of debt. KTM's whole identity was 3 words: ready to race. For a terrifying year, it looked more like ready to restructure. But against the odds, the factory is humming again, the bikes are selling again, and orange machines are still crossing finish lines first. Winning everything on the track could not save them from the math in the boardroom. That is the cautionary tale, and every ambitious company should tattoo it somewhere. Growth without discipline almost killed a legend. But if any brand on earth knows how to claw its way back from the dead, it is the one that has already done it before. KTM started in a repair shop in 1934. It rose, it conquered, it pushed growth too hard, and it very nearly vanished. The next chapter is being written right now in a factory in Austria and a boardroom in India, and honestly, I would not bet against the orange. If you want to see how another iconic brand handled a near-death collapse, there is a video waiting for you on screen right now. And if you made it all the way to the end of this one, you already know the drill. Hit subscribe, and I will see you at the next finish line.